This is episode 635 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, there is so darn much going on. Of course, it is election season, and there's a lot going on with that. But I was in Phoenix last week. And folks who watch the show may have seen a different background when I was talking to you last week. I was in my hotel room, but had a great visit with some of my think tank friends from the State Policy Network out in Phoenix, and bumped into a few friends of the organization, including Steve McKee, active guy politically, owner of the McKee Wallwork, or former owner now of the McKee Wallwork public relations advertising firm. He's since left that behind, but had a chance to meet Doug Ducey, the former governor of Arizona, and I've known Clint Bullock, who worked at the Institute for Justice, co-founded that, Goldwater Institute, and now is an associate Supreme Court justice in the Arizona Supreme Court. And got to try to plug Ducey for some thoughts on how to help New Mexico out. So, Arizona and New Mexico, once upon a time, joined at the hip as territories. One is not like the other. They have the extreme hot weather, so it was a lovely 110 in the shade out there, but it's not a dry heat anymore, especially during monsoon season, they get monsoon season too. I was delayed by 2 hours due to rainstorms and lightning coming back from Phoenix on my trip, but just talking with Ducey about some of the ways that he helped bring greater freedom, especially educational freedom, to New Mexico, also cutting taxes.
To Arizona.
Right. Arizona.
Yeah. Freudian slip. So,
yeah.
But did he have any concrete, here's the low-hanging fruit he thinks for New Mexico? Or, it's one of those you can't expect those around us to keep so close tabs on a state with 2 million people. So
I don't think there's any specific ways to, and he didn't have any aha, why didn't we think of that?
Right.
We have been doing this for 18 years at the Rio Grande Foundation, at least I have, and electing better candidates, people like Doug Ducey, would be a great starting point. Of course, Ducey himself, he's not a U.S. senator right now. I mean, how many Senate races have we seen come and go in Arizona? And so there are real splits within the Arizona Republican Party. Those are often found in the New Mexico Republican Party, different reasons. So there's no perfect world, but the political culture of Arizona for sure is much more conservative, much more desirous of growth economically and individual freedom, lower taxes, less regulation, or a right-to-work state. Obviously, education reform, regardless of demographics, they kick our butts educationally, and they continue to embrace new and innovative policies like the education savings account. So, just a good chance to get out there. August in Phoenix, don't recommend, but it was a great conference, and got to, like I said, meet some great folks from around New Mexico who happened to be out there, and sit down with the former governor of Arizona.
Well, and it is interesting, Paul, when you talk about Arizona. Arizona's had a lot of growth. They've had a lot of growth for a long time, and their most recent growth is people leaving California, and they stop in Arizona and in Texas, but New Mexico, not so much. So that is I think, an interesting phenomenon as well. And we've talked before. It's almost like nobody wants to come to New Mexico.
Yeah, well, we elect less qualified, less good candidates for public office. And I was in Arizona during the DNC, the Democratic National Convention, and saw Michelle Lujan Grisham out there giving a speech one night in prime time. And I thought to myself, whatever else Kamala Harris says in this campaign, having Michelle Lujan Grisham speak at your convention is disqualifying for the presidency. And I started my Albuquerque Journal opinion piece that ran this morning, Tuesday, the 27th, with a lovely quote from Groucho Marx. I refuse to join any club that would have me as a member. And that's kind of the way I feel about Michelle Lujan Grisham, because while Kamala Harris has been incredibly cagey with the aid of the media in not exposing her policy agenda, Michelle Lujan Grisham's been governor of New Mexico for 6 years. And I think it's hard to contemplate somebody who could do a worse job over that time span. So I'm going to run very quickly through her myriad policy failures. First and foremost, during a unprecedented oil and gas boom, which generated $15.2 billion in fiscal year 2023, that's more than 50% of the entire general fund budget. We've seen all of these failures. So it's not for lack of resources, but of course, we've seen New Mexico dead last in the National Assessment of Educational Progress, 52nd if you're keeping track at home. We also dead last in the Annie Casey Kids Count report. Something that I think the Republicans missed an opportunity to message against nationally is, what Kamala Harris believes on guns is kind of up in the air. We know she's anti-Second Amendment. I think it's safe to say. But having Michelle Lujan Grisham, who took it upon herself to abolish the Second Amendment in Bernalillo County and got criticized by even people like David Hogg, that should have been something that they highlighted. Restrictive COVID policies failed in New Mexico, third highest COVID death rate among U.S. states here. Of course, the EV mandates, we've ranted and raved about those many times. She talks about increasing the supply of housing while also mandating EV chargers and other building code that's driving up the cost of both apartments and regular housing, single-family homes. Energy Transition Act, we're going to talk a little bit about that later, and some of the issues with electricity generation in the state. And our Medicaid population's exploded to the point that 47% of our state is on Medicaid, according to the Legislative Finance Committee. She's finally caught religion on crime, but, obviously, when it comes to crime, those issues have spiraled out of control under Lujan Grisham's watch, with New Mexico being worst in the nation by at least some measures. So you put that on the national stage in prime time and say that, this is somebody who I'm friends with, that many of her policies I like, I think that's disqualifying.
Well, Paul, I think that is an interesting take. And the only thing I would say is, were there any policies of any kind presented at the Democratic National Convention? It seemed like one giant pep rally. You know what I mean? It's like, go fight, win, Democrats, go fight, win, Harris. And what are we going to do? We'll talk about that later. You have to elect us to see what we're going to do, and that's kind of the Nancy Pelosi. You'll have to pass it to see what's in it. That's right now the campaign. And then when she does say something like she wants to eliminate price gouging, even though she called it price gauging. Then she walks that back. It's like, oh, you can't possibly think that I was serious about that. I'm just throwing red meat to the forces. And so, yes, policies, not so much. This is a very much of a, right now on the Dem side, a campaign of personality. And man, she's getting the Taylor Swift, Beyonce treatment in the media. She is a celebrity, no doubt about that.
Yeah, and talking about policy and either the lack thereof or attaching the policies. And Tim Walz, in many ways, is like a clone, or Michelle Lujan Grisham is like a clone of Tim Walz. The big differences are that uh, Michelle Lujan Grisham came, did the Second Amendment thing. She directly attacked and attempted to take away guns. Tim Walz never did that directly, to my knowledge. I believe Michelle Lujan Grisham is the only politician in the country to, blatantly attempt to eliminate the Second Amendment. And then, of course, she's done all this while New Mexico's been in this amazing oil and gas boom. So, plenty to kind of discuss and criticize with regard to the Democratic convention. Personally, I didn't watch much of it. I did tune in for about 15 minutes of Joe Biden's speech, and I'll just
It
say
was
that
past his bedtime, so
it is physically uncomfortable to sit and watch somebody on television yell at you for however long it is. It's just it is off-putting in the most extreme, and the amount of misinformation and things that he said that simply are not true would take too long for us to go into all of it. But it's just the idea of him yelling. It felt like the George Orwell 15 minutes of rage, I believe is what it was in the book. So,
well, and Paul, his late in his career, his speaking style has kind of evolved into a World Wrestling Federation interview. It's like, I just want to tell my opponent. It's like, oh my goodness. It's like, okay. And you know what, Paul, we could forgive him if what was coming out of his mouth was political and policy gems, but it's not, as you say. So it's like content, not so good, delivery, probably even worse. And I guess what we have now, basically just a little bit over 3 months, and we'll see. The world won't have Joe Biden to kick around anymore.
yeah, well, we will probably do an entire episode about the issues in the election and whatnot. But I would definitely commend folks to read the Albuquerque Journal opinion piece that appeared today. While we discuss that oil and gas revenue and that oil and gas boom, new numbers came out showing, as I write at Heirs of Enchantment, that New Mexico's oil and gas gravy train keeps rolling along. And, this is portrayed a little bit as, the boom is slowing. Well, as I also write, I guess I'm full of quotes at this point, but Ben Stein, Bueller, that guy, his dad has a economic law named after him. His name was Herb Stein. Things that can't go on forever won't. And the ability of the oil and gas industry to generate the kind of revenue surpluses that it had been simply is mathematically impossible. So no longer do we have a $3.5 billion surplus facing the legislature when they convene in January. We'll only have $650 million in new money. Now, remember.
But that's on top of huge increases.
Exactly.
Well, and Paul, this is the same story as inflation. The D's are fond of saying, well, inflation's way down. Yes, after we've had a couple years of massive inflation. And so to say that oil and gas has slowed after rapidly growing over the past decade to absolutely astronomical levels, for it to slow down a little bit is like, yeah, it is. But again, that's new money. But look back, just what the state budget was, 5 years ago, how much money we have. And as we've said, and as you said in the earlier segment, money ain't our problem. Policy is our problem with regard to what's going on in New Mexico. So
absolutely. And unfortunately, this is yet another instance of our political classes simply missing the missing things when it comes to the opportunities that we have as a state. An op-ed appeared in the Albuquerque Journal on August 19th by State Senator George Munoz, Representative Nathan Small, and DFA Cabinet Secretary Wayne Probst. And Department of Finance and Administration is the agency that he runs. So these are all, people, George Munoz is head of the LFC and the Senate Finance Committee. So he's actually a voice of reason, but I stridently disagree with him and the content of this op-ed, which essentially does a victory lap. The title is New Mexico's Accumulating Unprecedented Savings for the Future. And they do update us on the total amount of our sovereign wealth fund, which is now $54.7 billion in savings. And it's just unbelievable. And they go through all the different ways that they're socking money away. Well, I just mentioned some of the failures we've seen, 52nd in education, 50th on kids count. We've spent a lot more money on education. What successes have we really seen out of that? Maybe it's time to change direction, build our economy, grow the private sector using the oil and gas money, not through corporate welfare, just good tax policy, good economic policy, making our state attractive as a destination, doing what we can about the education system, understanding that probably long-term, the best way to reform our education system is to have businesses in place that demand an educated populace and work to bring better reforms and better policies to our education system. And that's kind of the short way to reform New Mexico.
Well, this whole idea about we don't know what to do with the money and everything we do fails policy wise in Santa Fe, so let's just put it aside, is a lot like a family that's very, very, very wealthy. And we've met our kids and we know that they are certainly never going to be able to take care of themselves and go to school and get jobs. We better just put this money away so that they will be able to be supported. But in this case, what are we looking at supporting is not the state per se, but state government, the thing that's kind of been a leader in moving us to the position we're in. And so we're in a very tough spot. And how many things they said, well, if we only had enough money, we could fix this and we could fix that. And now we have a lot of money and we don't seem to be able to fix anything. And our core issues that we talk about so much on Tipping Point, New Mexico aren't getting any better. They're, well, Paul, we could say like in education, we're not getting any worse because when you're last place, there's nowhere to go. So, what are we really saying here?
Not exactly a ringing endorsement there, Wally. I'm not going to lie. I will say this, and back to my trip to Arizona, all these free market people all over the country, as frustrating as New Mexico's politics seem and really have seemed since Michelle Lujan Grisham got elected in 2018, and it's definitely frustrating to watch, especially while we have this budget surplus. New Mexico is perceived by national organizations and people as being a state that has a lot of potential, both in terms of its human capital and its resources, but also to change and move in a different political direction. We're not perceived as a California or even an Oregon or a Washington state. No, those of course are states that do a lot of things, even though they're blue, they do things better than New Mexico in most circumstances. New Mexico is seen as a state that could turn over and not only be more conservative and elect more conservative people, but could actually really thrive in not too long. And of course, having $15.2 billion rolling into your budget in a single year from oil and gas is certainly a reason to hope. But most people outside of New Mexico still, even policy wonk types, unless they're involved in energy policy, they don't realize that New Mexico is generating the kind of revenue it is. But I can't tell you the number of times I was asked, Arizona's so nice. Why is New Mexico so poor? Ah, yes.
Paul, not to get too biblical, we are a bit poor of spirit, not poor of money, at least in the state
Exactly.
coffers right now.
Yes. As I wrote, rich states, poor population. That is the story of New Mexico. And quite frankly, until we figure out that we need to do things differently, we're going to continue apace. So, changing gears a little bit and going from MLG and her bad policies to Mayor Keller and his uh, bad policies. There was, of course, recently a bit of a crime wave in Old Town Albuquerque, and I read these articles closely, and I think stuff that probably 99% of the readers they don't even see it or they don't get it. Maybe it's why it takes me so long to read even the Albuquerque Journal. Because if I read the Wall Street Journal, it's like 2 hours later, I'm in the pool of sweat and I'm tired from reading the thing. But because I really do dedicate myself to reading it. Well, here is from an article that appeared recently in the Journal. The title was Old Town Vandalized Again, Merchants and DA Exasperated. And there was one simple line that said, Our ask is simple. This is Old Town Businesses. And our ask is reasonable. One nightly patrol from APD throughout all of Old Town. 365 nights a year in perpetuity. Like, I mean, I get it, but maybe not after the planet has headed into the sun. But for the foreseeable future, I think it's a good idea
Yes.
to have one APD patrol. It's like Old Town Scottsdale not having a police officer uh, come through it on a given day. It's mind-boggling. This is elementary. Old Town is quite arguably the most relevant single tourist destination in the city of Albuquerque. Tram being another, but definitely right up there. When people come from out of state to Albuquerque, if they stay in Albuquerque, chances are they do go to Old Town, and for there not to be at least one officer patrolling Old Town on any given day is it's bananas. It's bananas, Wally.
Yeah, and then we've talked about, well, we're going to put more monitoring and this, that, and the other. It's like, okay, really? So who cares if there's monitoring if you never send cops and if you don't arrest the perpetrators and if you don't do something with them? And yeah, it's one of those things that uh, we have the cart before the horse on a lot of the policies on crime here in Albuquerque. And the other thing is, and we saw this in the failed special legislative session with regard to people who are causing a lot of problems but are not deemed competent to stand trial and let back go out onto the streets. And then this next comment is it's general. It's not just the current time. But there is a perception, and believe me, there are a lot of criminals in Albuquerque. But many crimes are caused by a very small group of people. When I lived on the west side years ago, there was a residential crime ring, and there was only a half a dozen people, but they were wreaking havoc on the west side from a number of break-ins and amount of crime. And once they caught, and back in those days, heaven forbid, put into jail this group, this small group of thieves, it's amazing the impact that it made. So, but when we have people, and I just get the sense that from my reading is they know who's doing this. Why is the DA frustrated is because he doesn't have the tools to put them in jail. And so if we do catch and release, what does that say? But in the meantime, guess what? If I'm the cops, arrest them every night. If they're breaking the law, and even if you can't keep them in, arrest them every night. Maybe they'll figure a best pass to another place might be better for them. And maybe if they were to go to another state and wouldn't be able to clean up their act, maybe their laws would allow them to help these people get the help they need as opposed to creating havoc in the city of Albuquerque.
You know, in the Sunday paper, Mayor Keller wrote an opinion piece himself. Albuquerque is a resilient city with a future worth fighting for. Uh, he talked a lot about technology and cameras and whatnot and shot spotter. And those are all well and good, but nothing does the job like having real officers patrolling real neighborhoods and arresting people for doing, breaking the law, and then credibly keeping them in jail for their crimes. And it just it just baffles me that they are unwilling or unable to figure out how to do these things. I can understand that there is a challenge in finding police officers and recruiting them and keeping, but are we really doing what we need to do, what we should do? It's not just about monetary benefits. It's also about feeling supported and understanding that the community is behind you. And we have so many of these goofy public education campaigns. One might think that they would do a little bit to highlight the challenges of being a police officer and give them a break and cut them some slack or this whatever. I mean, they had the whole campaign about zipping merging on the freeway. Well, how about some of that? And one line though stuck out about Keller's in Keller's piece, and he says, during these tough times, of course, we've had some missteps and false starts, but we've learned fast and are gaining real traction, pulling ourselves out of the doldrums. Now, I agree with Keller. This is a resilient city. It is worth fighting for, but you're the mayor of this city. You should be moving policies and governance in a direction that will address some of these issues. You're not an idle bystander. In fact, perhaps you are more empowered than any other single person in the city of Albuquerque to actually make a difference. The fact that he's been in office now close to 8 years and hasn't done what needs to be done already is an indicator of where we are as a city and the fact that he's simply incapable of getting the job done.
Well, and Paul, we're now seeing a very similar issue at the state level and at the city of Albuquerque, where we have the leaders.
Future for our families is something we will never give up on.
Oh,
I know some folks.
no problem. We have a
mistaken click.
No problem. So no problem. So we have a situation where the governor and the mayor of Albuquerque have been in office for a long time and done very little on an issue now that is really important to the citizenry. And that is, if that's mistakes are made and we've learned finally. But what is interesting, and we saw that at the legislature, maybe the governor might have realized it, but it's not a guarantee that the legislature has. And so we'll have to see what happens on these issues going forward. But people are concerned, and believe me, there's a huge amount of frustration out there. And you see at times that crime rates are down. Well, also you see a lot of I see a lot of anecdotal evidence, and I've talked to a lot of business owners where they cease to report crimes because if you report too many crimes, your insurance rates go up. The city will label your business a nuisance, and you will be the worse for wear. But we've got into a very, very damaging loop of behavior here in our state and our city. And man, it's going to take a little bit of bold leadership to get us out of it. And I hope that is on the way, because resilience has its limits, Paul, and then people will leave. And to this point, there hasn't been a mass exodus. There hasn't been people coming here because of it. And so there is, unlike our education stats, there's still a further down the pecking order that a city like Albuquerque can go, and we certainly hope it does not.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of that meme that goes around the internet all the time about hard times create strong men, strong men create good times create soft men, and then so on. It's kind of I don't know that Albuquerque's had a heyday per se in terms of the modern era that it's been considered this just well-governed, well-oiled machine. I mean, in retrospect, it certainly looks like the Mayor Chavez era. You can kind of almost credit voters for just reelecting the guy constantly, even though since his mayorship, he's turned into kind of a caricature of himself and just a left-wing kook. The idea that he was such a good governor for the time while he was in office, it's gone sideways, both R.J. Berry and the ART project, as well as Mayor Keller. So we're going to have a long road. And of course, we're all dealing with here in Albuquerque within the bandwidth of what goes on in Santa Fe. If policies are not hitting on all cylinders in Santa Fe, which they really haven't for decades and decades, then we're not going to have as much room to go in Albuquerque as we could otherwise.
Yeah, and believe me, we've got money for police. What would Albuquerque look like with a couple hundred? Notwithstanding the fact that we have a lot of other problems that we've talked about,
Yep.
a lot that may need the legislature, but, let's do that. And Paul, I am the last one for let's spend government money for the heck of it. If we're not attracting police officers at the salary, I can't think of anything else that with all these dollars floating around in our state, that we would have a better use for them than attracting high quality police officers
Exactly.
to our largest cities. So,
Exactly. All right, Wally, what if you had a product that you were giving away for free and people still didn't want it? That might be a problem.
that is a problem, Paul. And
Well,
what if the competing product actually cost out of pocket
yeah,
thousands of dollars a year?
and
But
yet,
people were still taking that over the free one.
Yeah.
What would that tell you? And we know what that is. I know where this is coming. I read ahead, but I think I would have guessed it anyway.
well, the Santa Fe New Mexican, we try to keep our eyes on all of the news outlets around the state. And the Santa Fe New Mexican does some really good work on some various policies. And there's been a fair amount of talk on absenteeism from our public schools, but the Santa Fe New Mexican provided some really nice data showing the increase in absenteeism from the 2018-19 school year to the 22-23 school year. So basically pre-COVID and post-COVID. And what they essentially found is that New Mexico, unfortunately, second highest among states, third highest if you include District of Columbia. But I'm kind of spitballing here, but it looks like our growth in absenteeism was the very worst among U.S. states. So we were right in the middle, kind of the pack. Not by any means among the lowest group of states when it came to absenteeism pre-COVID, but certainly we jumped during and after COVID in terms of absenteeism like no other state. Which, again, just a reminder, Michelle Lujan Grisham absolutely failed during COVID. It wasn't not just the COVID death rates. It's not just the economic costs and the small businesses that closed. It is also, and perhaps most importantly, what happened to our kids during COVID, during the year plus that she had our schools closed. But the Santa Fe New Mexican has this article. It shows all the states, and everybody has seen I would say, statistically significant uptick in absenteeism, which is definitely a concern. But no
And
state
what
has
is
seen.
the average rate of absenteeism? Isn't around, and it's very,
New Mexico's now is
Yeah.
just under 40%, which is
40
chronic
across the,
absenteeism.
yeah,
rate.
that's crazy. So, it's interesting.
That's up from about 17, 18%
Yeah.
pre-COVID. So massive increase.
Well, and Paul, there is still a big controversy in our state about 4 or 5 day school weeks.
Right.
Well, if Yeah, 40% absenteeism. You're only going to school, even if you're on a 5-day schedule, you're only going an average of 3 days a week anyway. So that has got to be huge. And so uh, the other factor that, again, this is anecdote, this is not a study. Although if I were a reporter, I'd write it up because I already have more sources than they do for most of the things they say. Is in the struggling public schools, I'd say absenteeism is number one, and I think number two is discipline.
Yeah.
I talk to teacher after teacher after teacher that says a small number of disruptive students are creating problems, and so you have a system where a lot of students aren't attending, and that those who do attend and actually want to learn and would learn are being hindered in their learning by discipline problems in the classroom. And so these seem like problems that could be solved because the private schools are able to solve them, and largely the charter schools are able to solve them, but the public schools are not. And then, Paul, my final point on education is there's a well-known study about school leadership. The quality of the principal at a school is a huge determinant of how successful a school is. And I do think that there are some fantastic principals. Why do we know that? Because there's some schools that, if you look at their demographics, you look at their student population, they shouldn't be doing as well as they are. Why are they? Is because there's fantastic leadership in that school. And so those are the Wally Drangmeister in lieu of any probably even needed. We don't need new laws. It's like, get out there and round up the kids, talk to the parents about absenteeism, deal with the discipline in the schools, but that takes leadership. So I don't know what the answer is, but yes, I read that article. It's been a while. It was in the New Mexican. And I was like, wow, that is a stunning numbers.
Well, like you, or I must have missed the public education campaign about sending your kid to school and that kind of stuff. Not saying, again, these
again, it's not there.
Public campaigns are the be-all, end-all, but you've got to make, and the article mentions norm erosion, which I think really does happen, and it was again a direct result of Michelle Lujan Grisham's failed COVID policies. There's no other way to point it out. Now, obviously, other states struggled with these issues, but nobody struggled more than New Mexico. So that is a absolute true fact. Now,
so norm erosion means it's normal to not go to school.
Right, it is.
But we're going to need to really do some extra effort to make that seem not normal to stay home. You've got to go to school.
Well, and again, the PR campaign, if you will, I'm not a believer that school choice will solve everything. I think it's open to question how much of an impact school choice would have, but also if there's incentives within the system to make sure that those kids do go to school, especially in those schools of choice, and empowering the parents, I think you start to make inroads. But we're not doing any of this in New Mexico, so it's probably futile. You really look at it and you say, well, when will New Mexico get out of dead last? Will any of the policies currently being discussed help us? Well, when you're seeing the kind of absenteeism rates that New Mexico is seeing, you can't learn if you're not in school. I think that is a very simple equation. And we got to move on here, Wally. We got just a few minutes left. There's other news stories, including you have a long track record in the utility business. The smokestacks came down at San Juan Generating Station up in the Four Corners this week. A momentous occasion, not something that I think there are plenty of people who are enthusiastic about this, but you and I are not among them. But it did happen.
Yes, so they will not have San Juan Generating Station anymore, and it can never be. 10 minutes after it was officially shut down, and they did some things that could never be reopened again. Um, there are a lot of plants that are scheduled to be closed over the coming decade, and believe me, I am the world's farthest thing from a hater of renewable energy. Paul, did you know that renewable energy right this second in PNM service territory is providing 89% of our electricity needs because it's relatively moderate. You know, that it's not that hot. There aren't that many air conditioners on. The sun's shining and the wind's blowing where wind farms are. But batteries are expensive, they're not reliable, and you need other things to do it. And, you know, coal plants have fulfilled that role. There's some of the existing ones that are looking at putting carbon capture to enable them to comply with the EPA rules and still provide a source of energy. But in the meantime, what's really carries the weight and for the foreseeable future will is natural gas, because natural gas is so cost effective. The price is very, very low. But we will see what happens. It's a lot easier to shut down plants and close them than it has been to build them. And the problem is never your temperate day with normal conditions. It's when you have your heat waves. It's when you have your cold fronts. And in the case of natural gas, you know, those events can happen that cause the natural gas to freeze, and there's a lot of issues to be done. And so, yeah, do I celebrate tearing down a smokestack? No, I do not. But I think that is a good reminder. Is there's a lot of work to be done with regard to keeping our electric system reliable and cost effective going forward, because the easy times of adding renewables is rapidly getting to the point where, you know, once you get so much in, that's all well and good. More does not help you, and that already happens in the case of solar. There's this thing called the duck curve. There's too much in the middle of the day, so you need ways to store it. And absent that, you're going to need nuclear, natural gas, you know, hydro or some other source to make our system operate until there's enough batteries to make that happen. And believe me, that doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime in the next 20, 30, 40 years in terms of the way the rollout of that is going.
Yeah, and while currently 89% may be of our power from renewables, at least in the PNM service area, you still need all of that natural gas or other traditional power sources because we're we need something when the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine, and you know, batteries can help, but only for a time, and that really becomes a problem because people don't just turn off the lights when the renewables stop flowing. Now, it is worth noting that Excel Energy declared an emergency, an energy alert last week, asking customers to conserve energy. This is, you know, for southeast New Mexico, Hobbs, and areas down there. So this is something that, you know, whether it's New Mexico or Texas or whatever policies, we're going to increasingly be dealing with potential shortages of electricity. And Excel Energy was dealing with it last week, and it's the sign of things to come. Last thing on the agenda, we talked about House District 53 down in Las Cruces. Sarah Silva, left-wing activist from Cafe and other groups, has indeed been chosen to carry the banner for the Democratic Party in that election, which is a very, very close race. This is John Hill, progressive, beat Willie Madrid, a moderate. He was one of those victims in the June primaries. John Hill withdrew for health reasons, subsequently, sadly, passed away. Sarah Silva was chosen by the Democratic Party Central Committee, which is interesting. Whether that is appropriate or not, I don't know the answer to that, but this will be an interesting race to watch because Silva is, like I said, a very, very left-wing individual. And We've seen the leftward shift, the lurch of the Democratic Party continuing, and Sarah Silva, if she were to be elected, would be another indicator of that. But it's a very tight race, and we'll see where things go. So with that, thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to this show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.